Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are live. Today is Wednesday, and I have a special Lunch and Learn guest. Her name is Stacy Miller, and she is a financial expert. I will let Stacy introduce herself, tell you a little bit about her own background and the things that she does. And then Stacy and I are going to be talking specifically about finances, financial security for the long term, and we're going to be talking about women in the wage gap. So I'm really interested about today's conversation, and I have tons of questions for you, Stacy, about military spouses. So be ready for that. Stacy, why don't you tell us a little bit about your own background, and then tell us a little bit about the company you work for?
Sure. So again, my name is Stacy Miller. I am a partner and a wealth advisor with Bright Investments. We are a small independent investment management firm. We are fiduciaries and fee only, and I can explain a little bit about what that is in a minute. I am a military spouse. Technically, my husband retired in 2018, so once a military spouse, always a military spouse. But that's why I can contribute to that part of the conversation, because been there, done that. Thinking about writing a book on it. So.
Awesome. So you congratulations. I know it was a couple of years ago, but retirement and transitioning into not having to move around anymore is awesome. And so let's talk about financial security. You're in the long term. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about how long-term financial security should be a focus for not only women, but military spouses. And then I might have some more questions for you.
Sure. So most of the time when people think about long-term financial security, they're thinking about a retirement plan. And, whether that's approaching quickly or that's 30, 40 years down the road, you get to a point where you have to stop working and you want to potentially start living at that point and or maintain the status quo. It looks different for everybody. So finding that financial security so that you can pay the bills, you can travel and see the grandkids if that's what you want to do. You can pay for health care if, there's a need for being, in a facility or something along those lines. So those are concerns that people think about long term. And, the earlier you start, the easier it is to approach that. And some of the anxiety about what that looks like gets taken away because you develop a plan. So you have goals for your long term, and you develop a plan so that whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you know how to achieve your goals in that long-term retirement.
So military spouses don't have very stable careers. What that means for retirement, from my minimal financial background, is that they often are not staying at companies long enough to vest into whatever retirement plan that company offers. So if you were going to talk to a military spouse specifically about long-term financial security and about retirement, what would you tell that spouse?
So I'm actually going to take a couple steps back and kind of lay the groundwork for this first. So probably a lot of your listeners, your audience has heard of the gender wage gap before. And what that means is, on average, women earn 82 cents to every dollar that a man earns. That's women in general. And then you can dial that down into some more diverse categories. So Black women earn 61 cents on the dollar compared to men. Native women earn 58 cents on the dollar, and Latina women earn 52 cents on the dollar. So you can see those numbers are decreasing. And so, that's the gender wage gap. And like you mentioned, women often take time off to raise their children. Sometimes they have to take time off to care for their parents or other family members. And, each time you start and stop your career, again, starting at the lower wage numbers, right? Your ability to increase your salary, have promotions is, it is decreased as a woman. And 92% of military spouses are women. So they're not exclusively, of course, but 92%. So when I'm speaking about military spouses in this instance, in generalities, I'm speaking about women, and that's why I gave those earlier statistics. So you're a military spouse and you move every 6 months to 2, 3, 4 years over the course of potentially decades if you stay in the service that long. You've probably had to take time off to raise your kids. You've probably had to quit a job and had trouble finding a job at the next duty station. Or maybe you didn't find a job at that next duty station and then you're moving to yet another one. Maybe you did find a job, but you're underemployed, meaning you're working below what your actual capability is because that's what's available. You just need income of some variety, and so you just take the first thing. And so this is just continuing to pile things on military spouses, these women, and that means their earning potential is so much less, and their ability to contribute to their long-term retirement is less, right? If they have less income, less ability to contribute. If they have gaps, no ability to contribute. And then oftentimes to participate in a workplace retirement plan, you have to work for X period of time, and they don't hit that milestone before they're moving again. So that's, military spouse retirement is really a concern. I'm going to use, share my personal story and say that, I am the stereotypical military spouse. I am highly educated because I filled in those gaps when I couldn't find a job with going back to school to get a degree, a certification or something. And, I've been unemployed and underemployed, and I've taken time off to raise my kids, and I've done all the things. And I've never had the opportunity to contribute to a workplace retirement plan. And so that puts me in a position where I have to rely on my spouse's retirement plan. And, I have all the best of intentions and hopes for every single military couple that they go the distance. But, divorce is a real thing. Losing a spouse is a real thing. And so, having that independent goal to have my own retirement plan and execution in place is, really important. It's something that has given me fear and anxiety over the years, and something that I, love to share with military spouses and the service members, so that, you understand that there are opportunities, and there's actually some really great progress happening in 2020 along these lines as well.
So there has been recently, I've been seeing it floating around, and I'm not an expert here, but there was a Military Spouse Retirement Protection Act or some kind of legislation that came up on my radar a few weeks ago. And I was so happy to see that. Do I understand it? Absolutely not, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And another statistic, you were telling me these horrible numbers about the gender wage gap, and for women of diverse ethnic backgrounds, it goes lower and lower and lower. There's some more data out there about military spouses specifically, and it is that military spouses on average earn 25% less than their civilian counterparts.
Yeah.
And that was something that came, it was a White House publication from 2018, and it was the demographics and something publication. I'll have to drop it in the link, but drop a link in the comments. But it was horrifying to see that just as a military spouse, you get sort of a double whammy. You already, as a woman, 92% of spouses are women, earn less because you're a woman, and because you're a military spouse, you're earning 25% less on top of that. So then There's also data out there about the penalty of having children, which you've touched on.
Yep.
And that drives your income down even further. And it's very alarming.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then you throw a pandemic at the situation, right? You have a gender wage gap, which over the course of decades of all these complicating factors becomes the gender wealth gap. And then you throw a pandemic at it, a pandemic that, inadvertently is affecting women more than men because of the industries that are, affected. And, kids not being in school, it's generally, again, the woman that has to stay home. And, so many school districts are requiring homeschooling. And, so you're either managing a job and trying to homeschool your kids and kind of losing your mind a little bit, or you're exiting the workforce. And the numbers that they've talked about in the last couple of months of women exiting the workforce because of this pandemic are just taking us decades in the wrong direction as far as progress is concerned.
And thinking about women that are of prime working age right now also went through an economic depression 12 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So we've been hit twice, right?
Yeah.
So that's something we're still rebounding from the first economic depression that we had in 2008, 2009, and we're having another one. And so we're being just attacked from all fronts here. So let's discuss this. Military spouses, in general, people don't always stay married. Your spouse may pass away. What happens if you're a military spouse and you're totally reliant on your service member's retirement? What happens if the worst happens?
So there's certainly a lot. So I'm going to divide that into two separate questions. If we're talking about a divorce, right, you really have to fight for your rights to, that aspect, the retirement aspect. And, sometimes service members don't make it to retirement, but they do retain benefits as a veteran. And, the unfortunate story and spouses that I've spoken to previously that are going through this is that they don't feel supported with the right tools. So, attorneys that are supporting the spouse, if it's a service member, they have JAG and let's call them in-house attorneys, military attorneys that can facilitate that. But the spouse doesn't feel supported in that way. It's complicated to figure that all out. And so the truth of it is you have to fight for the ability to, earn these privileges as a spouse. It does matter how many years you've been married. But it's challenging for sure. I've spoken to several, and it's challenging. It's not fun. Divorce is not fun under any circumstances, but it's really challenging, to get your, future goals in line when you're dealing with that. And, the opposite end of the spectrum, if you lose a service member while in service, service related or otherwise, there's a lot of things in place that are set up for that spouse and family, and that, not necessarily the financial situation, but that process goes a little more smoothly. Now, in either case, you're dealing with grief, and it's complicated and it's hard. I have a widow that I'm working with right now, lost her husband Christmas of last year. And, if finances are not your normal jam, if that's not something that you're managing for your family, to start and try to figure it out and, get the right people to help you and figure these things out. It's just overwhelming when you have, the grief of a divorce or the grief of losing a spouse. So for sure, there's tools and advice out there for those people, but it is absolutely a challenge and something that you can't sit back and rely on someone else to help you with.
Right. There's another demographic I want to talk about as well. and that is military families who are perhaps lower enlisted. I believe the average E3 salary is $25,000 or so, right? And that's not a livable wage. They do get housing and things like that afforded to them. But imagine if you are the family of an E3 service member and you're stationed over in California where it's astronomical cost of living. You're struggling to survive at that point.
Yeah.
You're struggling to pay your bills. And then on top of it, the spouse is often unemployed. And so what's your advice for families that may be financially struggling while in active duty service? When they're financially struggling just to survive, what do you do about retirement at that point?
So that is a complicated question, and it is dependent on so many factors. But I'm going to give an opposite example to show how diverse this question really can be. I rode in an Uber. Remember the days when you get to travel and ride in an Uber? So this is a year ago or so. And my Uber driver picked me up in a very expensive car. This is in downtown Atlanta. And he was 7.5 feet tall and just clearly looked like a basketball player. But, you know, he didn't say he was a basketball player. But he picked me up and, you know, asked me, you know, what brings you to Atlanta, business or pleasure? And I said, well, I was here for a conference. I'm a wealth advisor and, you know, yada, yada, yada. I thought that would turn the conversation off. Who wants to talk to a financial advisor? But he said, oh, I have a question for you. How much should I be saving for retirement? And I said, you know, that's a very broad question. But generally speaking, I'm going to say at least 10% of whatever it is you're making. So if it's 25,000, then you should be saving 10% and living on the other 90. And, you know, circumstances are different depending on where you're living and how many kids you have and all the things. And then he said, well, because I was in the NBA, I was making millions of dollars, and now I'm an Uber driver living out of my car. And so it was shocking. It kind of looked like he was living out of his car because his trunk was full. I couldn't put my suitcase in it. So, you know, I had a suspicion he was NBA or former NBA, and then he was living out of his car. It was a very nice car. But that's the truth of it, is it goes back to how to manage your money. And financial literacy is at the basis of that. So, you know, what I told him was what you should have been doing was saving 90% and living on 10, because you're a young man and you have decades of life in front of you, and your retirement could happen, or maybe did happen, you know, before you're even 30 years old. So that's why it's so important to understand the specifics of every situation.
Wow.
In the case of, you know, the young enlisted person, absolutely, there is a way to, you know, take a small piece of your earnings and set it aside and let it grow for your future. And, you know, the younger that you start doing that, the more decades there are to compound. You've probably heard of compound interest, right? Compounding returns and interest. The longer it has to grow, and you know, the better information that you have, then, you know, it will work for you. But these kinds of financial literacy things are not taught in high school or in college, or, you know, people don't know what they don't know. And if this was a message that this young NBA player had been given, and maybe he was given this message, but it went in one ear and out the other, but, you know, that people understand it, teach it, ingrain it, that yes, it's possible, no matter what your income and earnings is, that you can and should start now saving whatever you can, investing it, and let it grow and work for you, so that when your retirement age comes, there are opportunities for you to enjoy life.
I am so fascinated by this story about the NBA player living in his car. That's mortifying to think that at one point in time in the not so long ago past, that person had millions of dollars that they had at their fingertips, and then now they're living in a car. So that should be sort of sage advice, cautionary tale to anybody listening.
Yep.
So I was thinking about professional athletes. It's notorious when you came into money quickly, don't know what the heck you're doing with money. It happens with professional athletes. It happens with lottery winners who make a fortune and then just throw it all away in a heartbeat.
Right.
Let's talk about other transitions in life. So you may be an NFL player, an NBA player, you transition out of your professional athlete career, have all this money, and then what do you do with it after that? So service members transition as well. And I'm not going to deep dive into the new retirement plan, but right now the old service members, like my husband, had grandfathered into the nice retirement plan. You get out, you get your pension for the rest of your life, right? The young folks coming up don't have that same pension type retirement. And it's sort of more like a 401k.
That's right.
Right? And so they're not going to retire at 20 years and get a golden watch at the end and get that instant paycheck. They're going to have to retire like everyone else and wait until they're 65 or older to get it, right? So with that in mind, and with already bearing in mind the financial burden that a lot of military families go through, what advice would you give folks, that are military families with the new blended retirement system for future financial security?
Sure. So what you said is correct. The new plan is very similar to 401k, and it's not just the military that have moved in that direction. Almost all organizations are moving away from the defined benefit plan, which is the pension plan that you mentioned. My husband has a pension, so that category is called defined benefit. And the 401k falls into what we call defined contribution. So you're contributing to your own retirement. It's a way for that organization, in this case the military, to facilitate a way for you to save for your own retirement. And what's really important, and I think is maybe a little lacking in this area, is getting advice on what to do. So, my best advice, speaking in generalities, is to contribute as much as you can contribute, going back to that, 10% or 90% for that NBA player, right? He could live off of 10% and live well and save 90. And so depending on what your circumstances are you raising children? Are you living in base housing? What your rank is, what community you're in. Contribute as much as you can for the defined contribution plan, and understand that how it is invested is, will dictate how much you have when it comes to retirement. So it is an investment. You could lose it all, potentially, because that's what the stock market is. There's no guarantees in your stock market investments. But you have to be a little bit risky, and you can take a little more risk depending on your age. If you have decades of time until retirement, then you can take a little more risk. If you're approaching your retirement, you should back off on that risk a little bit and find some, less risky investment opportunities. But youth and wisdom and time and money are the things that will help you to find your rainbow in retirement, right? That pot of money at the end of the rainbow that will help you live your best life. But you have to get some good advice, not just on how much you should contribute, but in how to invest that contribution. And then when you separate from the service, you can leave it where it is, or you can move it without a tax consequence. You're just transferring from point A to point B, and get some different investment opportunities. The investment opportunities that the service members have currently in that plan are limited. I don't even know the number, but there's X number of mutual funds that are offered. But when you separate, you could invest in a variety of different things depending on your risk profile and all those other factors. So definitely important to be thinking in advance about that transition, as far in advance as possible. If you didn't think about it yesterday, I'm telling you to think about it today, and start using time and years and decades to compound your returns and your interest so that your money will work for you.
Awesome. Thank you. We, as military families, have lots and lots of resources at our disposal to learn basic financial literacy. There's typically, most military installations have a financial readiness program built into it somewhere in some capacity. When you transition out of the military, you're supposed to go through a financial course at least. And then the service members, at least I'm an Army spouse, so at least the Army, every time they PCS, they put them through kind of a series of workshops and classes to talk about the resources on that installation as a part of their in-processing. And I know at least one of the classes is about financial resources. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about all of the financial resources available to military families, do you have any particular recommendations on where to go to get that advice?
I don't have a specific recommendation, except I will say that I think it's dismissed or not taken seriously in all cases, because people are living adult lives. They have income, maybe they have debt, they have credit cards. You know, they don't know what they don't know as far as managing their finances, and so I don't think everyone takes it as seriously as they could and should. So that would be my advice, is to take it seriously. Certainly, both in service and out of service. There's nonprofit organizations that help. There's military organizations that help. And I just would recommend that you take advantage of those opportunities. You reach out if you have questions. There's plenty of opportunities to learn the things that you want to learn. Find people to help you. A point that I'll make, let's say, regarding financial advisors. There's like 350,000 financial advisors in America. It's a lot. And, I'll tell you that they are not all the same. Some are licensed for this and some are licensed for that. And some are sales people, in that they work for a company that has a product that they're selling. And some are, provide advice rather than a product. And so two terms that I would highly recommend that your audience know and understand and look for. Number one is fiduciary. So when you're looking for a financial advisor, you're looking for help in trying to manage these questions, you look for a fiduciary. And what that means is someone that by law has to do what's in your best interest. So they, can't make a recommendation because they're going to get a higher commission or, something along those lines. So you want to look for a fiduciary, number one. And number two, I just made reference to commissions. There are advisors that are fee only, and those fees can look different. They can be hourly, they can be project-based, they can be based on assets under management. But if you're fee only, that means you're not charging a commission. And so that kind of makes it easier to do what's in your best interest if that incentive is not there. And I want to clarify, because the industry has made this confusing. Fee-based sounds very similar to fee only, actually means can include a commission. So fee only is the term you're looking for, and fiduciary is the term you're looking for. Again, if you're looking for advice outside of what the military provides, that would be my recommendation. Okay.
Good information. I would never have known the difference in fee-based and fee only. I would never have known that. And people don't bother to look up fiduciary when they see that. They don't bother. No, so that's really good info, actually.
Fiduciary is not a word I learned in high school or anywhere along my spelling bees, or So it's a newer word, one that people have maybe heard but don't really know what it is. And fee-based and fee-only just sound so similar, and they're so different. Yeah. So that's why I like to point that out.
Okay. It's already 12:30. This time has been flying by. I wanted to, while I have you, ask questions about self-employment. It is estimated that approximately half of military spouses turn to self-employment at some point during their careers, because it just makes sense. You can freelance, you can start a business, you can start some kind of a side hustle and be your own employer and not have to, rely on the external, requirements of a position. Being somewhere at a certain place or time, you can have more flexibility for your kids, right? Mm-hmm. So self-employment I know it's a whole can of worms that you could open, but generally, any tips or tricks or advice that you might have for military spouses that do turn to self-employment, because it doesn't come with built-in retirement like a traditional employer?
It doesn't. And yes, I've seen that trend here locally. I'm in Tampa Bay, and there's just a lot of military spouse entrepreneurs doing some amazing things, much like yourself. And definitely a trend, because you get sick of moving and not finding a job, or finding a job where you get paid less or you're underemployed. So there's small business associations locally are just a godsend, right? There's so much great information out there that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So as you're thinking about starting a business, that would be my first recommendation, is to go that way. As far as planning for the long term and planning for retirement, there are absolutely fine retirement plans that can be set up. And this is obviously outside of the military. You'd have to go through your financial advisor. But there are tax advantaged retirement plans that, we'll call it, mimic a workplace retirement plan, but that have been created for the benefit of small businesses and entrepreneurs. The SEP IRA and the Simple IRA are two that I think are really important to investigate. And I want to go back to a point that I didn't circle back around on earlier. We were talking about the military spouse retirement opportunities that are available in 2020. So there's a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate that are designed to help military spouses, whether they're working for an employer or small business entrepreneurs, that facilitate those opportunities to save for their own retirement. And I just wanted to point out that there's actually progress being made to help military spouses with this specific concern. And I love the progress that's being made. There's a lot more to do for sure, but there are opportunities for sure.
Well, and just imagine my surprise. I feel like I have a pretty good beat on the pulse of anything that goes on in the military spouse world. And then suddenly I'm seeing some piece of legislation moving that I hadn't even heard about. So I was pleasantly surprised to see those, the Retirement Act or whatever it is called, moving and going somewhere. So super excited. Military spouses are complex and very much so misunderstood in the, to the general public, I would say. If you're not in the military community, you just don't understand the life that we live every day and the challenges that we face. And, the last thing we want to talk about is money. The last thing we want to talk about is saving for retirement, but it is such a massive, huge concern because of our employment problems that we have. So I'm super grateful to see some positive movement in the right direction. Stacy, is there anything that you have coming up, any events or anything like that you'd like to talk about? Because we're getting ready. It's getting ready to wrap up our live here. Do you have any last advice, anything that you want to talk about before we close out here today?
Two things. Number one, I got to figure out which way I'm going to. So I want to show everybody what this is. So that's the, the bull, the Wall Street bull. And standing in front of him is a statue, and she was in front of the bull for a while. And she's called the Fearless Girl. And State Street Bank hired someone to create that. She stands in front of the New York Stock Exchange. But that's just a graphical representation. People always ask me about it when I'm doing Zooms. It's behind me. But she's a graphical representation of the things that we're talking about, right? Standing up for yourself as a woman in finance and in wealth. So I just wanted to point that out first. And second, if interested in learning more, I try to share freely as much information as I get regarding women in wealth and military spouses. So please follow me on LinkedIn. It's Stacy Miller, CFP, which stands for Certified Financial Planner, and Bright Investments. We have a website, we have a Facebook page, and on Instagram, I'm at the Stacy Miller, STACY Miller. And I encourage you to follow me. I am sharing information as often as I get it, the new stuff, the good stuff, the old stuff that people still don't always know. And that's all I have to share.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on with me today, Stacy. And, I appreciate your time today. So if you're watching and you have questions for Stacy later, drop them in the comments. While we're actually live, I can't go in there and fuss with comments because I don't have that much focus. So if you have questions, drop them in the comments. I will answer them, or I will ping Stacy and have her do it for you. And thank you so much for watching. And thank you, Stacy, for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Jamie.